Tonight, you are going to learn the entire history of cryptography from ancient Sparta to quantum computers, the secrets that changed wars, executed queens, and right now, at this exact moment, protect every dollar in your bank account. To understand why cryptography exists, you have to understand the world before it existed. Imagine you are a military commander in ancient Greece. You have an army positioned 3 days' march to the east, and you need to send them orders: move north, attack at dawn, retreat to the river. The only way to deliver that message is to hand it to a human being, put that human being on a road, and hope he arrives. But roads in the ancient world were not safe. Enemy soldiers patrolled them, bandits worked them, and if your messenger was captured, everything he carried, every word of your plan, every detail of your strategy, was now in the hands of the people you were trying to defeat. This was the problem that started everything. It was not an abstract problem. It was not a puzzle that bored philosophers invented to pass the time. It was a life and death operational crisis that every army, every government, every ruler in the ancient world faced every single day. The information you needed to send was exactly as dangerous as the army itself. In some ways, it was more dangerous because a captured soldier could stay silent, but a written message simply lay there, readable by anyone who picked it up. Think about that for a second. The entire field of cryptography, the mathematics that protects your bank account, your messages, your identity online, began with one unbearably simple problem. You need to send a message. You cannot trust the road. What do? The Spartans had an answer, and it involved a stick. The Spartan solution was so simple, it is almost funny, until you realize that hidden inside it is an idea so fundamental that every encryption system ever built, from ancient parchment to modern banking software, still runs on exactly the same principle. Here is how it worked. A Spartan general would take a long, thin strip of parchment and wind it tightly around a wooden rod, a rod of a very specific diameter, one that matched an identical rod held by the intended recipient. With the parchment wrapped around the rod, the general would write his message across the surface in normal, readable lines. Then he would unwrap the parchment. What was left looked like complete nonsense. A long, thin strip covered in letters that appeared to be scattered randomly, with no connection to each other, no readable pattern, no meaning at all. The strip would then be sent with the messenger. If that messenger was captured, the enemy soldier who unrolled the parchment would see nothing useful, just scattered letters, just noise. The Spartan commander waiting at the other end would take that same strip, wind it around his own identical rod, and the letters would align perfectly. The message would reappear exactly as written. The device was called a cytail, and the rod, that specific diameter, the shared physical object that both sender and receiver possessed, was the world's first encryption key. Think about that word for a moment. Key. You use it every single day. Every password you have ever typed, every PIN you have ever entered, every time you have seen that small padlock icon appear in your browser, that is the direct descendant of a Spartan general wrapping leather around a stick somewhere around 700 BC. The concept has never changed. Only the mathematics got more sophisticated. The cytail worked, but it had a problem. It was physical. You needed the rod. You had to manufacture it, guard it, carry it, and if you lost it or it was captured, your entire system of communication was compromised. What the world needed next was an encryption method that existed not in an object, but in an idea, something a general could carry in his head, with nothing physical to lose. Julius Caesar solved this problem somewhere around 50 BC, and he solved it with elegant simplicity. The Caesar cipher works like this. You take the alphabet, and you shift every single letter by a fixed number of positions. Caesar used 3. So the letter A becomes D, the letter B becomes E, the letter C becomes F. You move through the entire alphabet that way, and when you reach the end, you wrap back around, so X becomes A, Y becomes B, Z becomes C. Now the message, "Meet at dawn," becomes PHWDDZQ. To anyone who intercepts it, it looks like meaningless noise. But to the Roman commander on the receiving end, who knows the shift number is 3, reversing it takes seconds. He simply shifts every letter back by 3 positions, and the original message reappears perfectly intact. What Caesar had done, and this is the part worth sitting with, was move the secret out of a physical object and into a number. The key was no longer a rod. The key was knowledge. Specifically, knowledge of a single number that both sender and receiver shared privately. Caesar reportedly used this cipher for personal correspondence with Cicero, not just military orders, which tells you something important about how naturally humans reach for secrecy the moment they have something worth protecting. And Rot 13, a Caesar cipher with a shift of 13, still used today on internet forums to hide spoilers and punchlines, is the direct living descendant of what Caesar was doing in 50 BC. The mathematics has not changed at all, just the stakes. For nearly 1,000 years after Caesar, the world operated on a comfortable assumption that if your cipher was complex enough, if your substitution was clever enough, if the scrambled letters looked sufficiently like nonsense, then your message was safe. Nobody could read it without the key. The secret was secure. That assumption was completely, catastrophically wrong, and the man who proved it was not a military general, not a spy, not someone with any obvious reason to be breaking codes at all. He was a philosopher and polymath living in 9th century Baghdad, working in one of the most remarkable institutions the ancient world ever produced, a place called the House of Wisdom, where scholars translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, and where the boundaries between mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and linguistics were treated as suggestions rather than walls. His name was Al-Kindi, and sometime around 850 AD, while studying the patterns of language in the Quran, he noticed something that would permanently change the nature of secrecy. He noticed that in any piece of writing, in any language, certain letters appear far more frequently than others. In Arabic, certain letters showed up again and again. In English, though Al-Kindi was working in Arabic, the letter E appears in roughly 13% of all text. The letter T appears in about 9%. The letter A in about 8%. This is not random. It is a structural feature of language itself, baked into every sentence ever written. And here is what Al-Kindi realized. If you take a Caesar cipher or any substitution cipher, no matter how complex, and you substitute one letter for another consistently throughout the message, you have not hidden the frequency. You have only hidden the identity. The most common letter in the ciphertext is almost certainly standing in for the most common letter in the original language. The second most common letter in the ciphertext is almost certainly the second most common in the original. You can map them one by one and reconstruct the message without ever knowing the key. He called this technique frequency analysis. And with it, every substitution cipher that had protected the secrets of empires for 1,000 years became, in principle, a puzzle that any patient and observant person could solve. Logic had defeated hiding. For the first time in history, mathematics was more powerful than secrecy. Al-Kindi's discovery sent a shockwave through the world of secret communication that took centuries to fully absorb. Frequency analysis could crack any simple substitution cipher. Then simple substitution ciphers were useless. The entire framework of cryptography needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. The answer came from Renaissance Italy, and it was, in its own way, as elegant as the problem it was solving. The insight belonged to a scholar named Leon Battista Alberti, who in the 1460s proposed something that seemed almost too simple to work. What if, instead of using one fixed substitution alphabet for the entire message, you used multiple alphabets, switching between them as you wrote? The same letter in the original message might be encrypted differently each time it appeared, depending on where in the message it fell. Frequency analysis would be completely defeated, because the frequencies in the ciphertext would no longer reflect the frequencies in the original language at all. A French diplomat named Blaise de Vigenère refined this idea into a practical, usable system in 1553. And the result was something the cryptographic world had never seen before. The Vigenère cipher used a keyword. If your keyword was, say, the word K, then the first letter of your message was shifted by the value of K. the second by the value of E, the third by the value of Y, and then the pattern repeated from the beginning. Every letter in the original message was encrypted using a different shift, determined by its position relative to the repeating keyword. The effect on frequency analysis was devastating, because the same letter in the plain text could become 5 or 6 different letters in the ciphertext. The statistical patterns that Al-Kindi had exploited simply vanished. The ciphertext looked, to any analyst studying it, like pure random noise. The cryptographic world called it le chiffre indéchiffrable, the unbreakable cipher. And for 300 years of wars, of espionage, of royal courts and diplomatic intrigue, it held. No one broke it. The secrets of the most powerful people in the world rested safely behind a repeating keyword and a shifting alphabet. For 300 years, until the wrong person trusted it with the wrong secret. It is 1586. Mary, Queen of Scots, has been a prisoner of her cousin Queen Elizabeth I for 18 years. She has not seen open sky freely in nearly 2 decades. She has been moved from castle to castle, her household shrunk, her correspondence monitored, her every movement controlled. She is a queen with no kingdom, a Catholic monarch in a Protestant country, and she is running out of time. There are people in England and abroad who believe she is the rightful Queen of England. And Mary, quietly, desperately, has begun to agree with them. Through a carefully arranged system of smuggled letters hidden in the stoppers of wine barrels delivered to her household, Mary began corresponding with a young Catholic nobleman named Anthony Babington. The plan they discussed was direct and brutal. Babington and his associates would assassinate Queen Elizabeth. Catholic powers in Europe would invade. Mary would be placed on the English throne. Every letter was encrypted. Mary used a sophisticated nomenclature cipher, a system that combined symbol substitutions with code words for important names and places, layered on top of a Vigenère-style alphabetic shift. She believed with complete confidence that her correspondence was secure, that no one outside her trusted circle was reading her words. She was wrong. Every single letter had been read. Thomas Philippus, Queen Elizabeth's master codebreaker, a small, pockmarked man described by contemporaries as having the quiet intensity of someone who never stopped thinking, had broken Mary's cipher months earlier. He and Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master, had not only been reading the letters, they had been allowing them to continue, letting the conspiracy grow, waiting for the moment when they had enough to act. That moment came in July 15. Babington sent Mary a letter detailing the assassination plan in full. Mary wrote back, asking for details about the 6 men assigned to kill Elizabeth. Philippus forged a postscript in Mary's own cipher, in handwriting carefully imitated to match the existing letters. He added a request from Mary, asking Babington to name all the conspirators involved in the plot. Babington replied. He named them. Everyone. Mary was arrested. The conspirators were executed, and on the morning of February 8, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was beheaded in the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle. The cipher had not protected her. The cipher had convicted her. The code she trusted with her life had become, in the hands of a patient and brilliant enemy, the instrument of her destruction. Think about that for a second. The drama of it, the lesson of it. Mary's cipher was sophisticated. It was layered. It was, by the standards of its time, genuinely strong. But strength of design means nothing when the enemy is not trying to break the mathematics. They are waiting for you to use it. And every time you use a cipher, you give the person on the other side more material to work with. This is the central truth of cryptography that has never changed. From Mary's wine barrel letters to your WhatsApp messages today, a lock is only as good as the assumptions it was built on. And the moment those assumptions are wrong, the lock becomes a trap. It is January 1970. The First World War has been grinding through Europe for 2.5 years, and the United States is still watching from a distance, officially neutral, deeply reluctant to send its sons into a European catastrophe that most Americans felt had nothing to do with them. Germany knew this, and Germany had a plan. Arthur Zimmermann, the German Foreign Secretary, sent a telegram to the German ambassador in Mexico City. The message was encrypted using a German diplomatic cipher called Code 113040, a system the Germans considered completely secure. The contents of that telegram were extraordinary. Zimmermann was proposing a military alliance with Mexico. If the United States entered the war against Germany, Mexico should join Germany's side. In exchange, Germany would help Mexico recover the territories it had lost to the United States decades earlier. Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It was an audacious proposal. It was also intercepted before it arrived. British naval intelligence, operating out of a department known simply as Room 40, had been secretly reading German diplomatic communications for years. Their codebreakers had already cracked Code 13040. They read the Zimmermann telegram in full within days of its transmission, and then they faced a problem that had nothing to do with mathematics. If they revealed the telegram's contents to the United States, Germany would immediately realize that Code 13040 had been broken. They would change their cipher systems overnight, and Britain would lose one of its most valuable intelligence advantages at the most critical moment of the war. The secret of their code-breaking ability was, in many ways, worth more than any single piece of intelligence it produced. So British intelligence constructed a careful deception. They arranged to obtain a copy of the telegram through a source in Mexico City, making it appear the leak had come from Mexican channels rather than British code-breaking. The story held. Germany never suspected their cipher had been read. The telegram was handed to the American government in February 1970, but was published in American newspapers shortly after. The public reaction was immediate and volcanic. Within 2 months, the United States declared war on Germany. One broken cipher, one forged cover story, one world war extended and then ended differently than it would have been. The lesson Germany took from the First World War was clear. Human-designed cipher systems, no matter how carefully constructed, were vulnerable to patient and brilliant enemies. What was needed was something no human analyst could reasonably attack, a machine that changed its own internal wiring with every single keystroke, producing a cipher so complex and so constantly shifting that breaking it by hand would be not merely difficult but mathematically impossible within any useful time frame. Arthur Scherbius was a German electrical engineer who had been thinking about exactly this problem since before the war ended. In 1918, he patented a device he called the Enigma machine, an electromechanical cipher device that looked, on the outside, somewhat like a typewriter. You pressed a key. The letter lit up on a display panel, but between the key you pressed and the letter that lit up, the electrical signal passed through a system of rotating wheels, a plugboard of crossed cables, and a reflector, each component scrambling the signal in a different way, and each component changing its configuration with every single keystroke. The result was a cipher that never repeated itself in any predictable short-term pattern. The mathematics of what Scherbius had built were staggering, with 3 rotors selected from a set of 5, each rotor having 26 positions. Combined with a plugboard connecting 10 pairs of letters in any configuration, the total number of possible Enigma settings was 158 quintillion. Written out fully, that number looks like this: 188,962,555,217,826,000. The German military adopted the Enigma machine and enhanced it further, adding a 4th rotor for naval communications. Every single day at midnight, all Enigma operators across the entire German military simultaneously switched to a new settings configuration, a new starting position for the rotors, a new plugboard arrangement, a new internal wiring order. Even if an enemy somehow managed to determine today's settings, that knowledge would be worthless in less than 24 hours. The Germans were certain it was unbreakable. The logic seemed sound. The mathematics seemed to support them completely. They were almost right, and that word almost would cost them everything. Bletchley Park is a Victorian country estate about 50 miles northwest of London, an unremarkable red brick mansion surrounded by lawns and gardens that, from the outside, looked like nothing more consequential than a wealthy family's country retreat. From 1939 onward, it was the most important building in the world. The British government had assembled there the most extraordinary collection of mathematical minds, linguists, chess champions, and crossword puzzle experts ever gathered in one place, all working toward a single purpose: breaking the Enigma machine before the German military broke the Allied forces. Alan Turing arrived at Bletchley Park in September 1939, 2 days after Britain declared war on Germany. He was 27 years old, a Cambridge mathematician with a particular genius for abstract logical systems, but by most accounts a deeply unusual person, brilliant in a way that made ordinary social interaction feel like a foreign language he had never quite learned. He ran long distances alone, cycled to work in a gas mask to manage his hay fever, and chained his coffee mug to a radiator to prevent it being stolen. He was also the person who would save millions of lives. But Turing did not work alone, and this is something the history books have not always been generous about acknowledging. Before Turing arrived at Bletchley, 3 Polish mathematicians, Marian Rejewski, Henryk Zygalski, and Jerzy Rajicki, had already made the first cracks in early versions of the Enigma cipher during the 1930s, exploiting procedural errors by German operators and mathematical patterns in the machine's construction. When Poland was invaded in 1939, they smuggled their findings to British and French intelligence. Turing inherited their work, understood it completely, and built upon it. What Turing designed was a machine called the Bombe, an electromechanical device roughly the size of a large wardrobe, covered in rotating drums that replicated the internal logic of Enigma rotors. Bombe exploited a fatal weakness that had nothing to do with mathematics and everything to do with human behavior. German Enigma operators, under pressure and following routine, frequently began their messages with predictable phrases. Weather reports always started the same way. Morning messages often opened with standard military formalities, and operators in the field sometimes used lazy rotor settings. Turing called these predictable fragments cribs, known or guessed pieces of plaintext that could be tested against the ciphertext to narrow the search for the day's settings from 158 quintillion possibilities down to a manageable number. Bombe, running continuously, could test thousands of rotor configurations per minute. By 1943, over 200 Bombe machines were operating at Bletchley Park, and the Allies were reading significant portions of German military communications in close to real time. Historians estimate that breaking Enigma shortened the Second World War by at least 2 years and saved somewhere between 14 and 21 million lives. Alan Turing did not receive a hero's welcome when the war ended. The work at Bletchley Park remained classified for decades. In 1952, the British government prosecuted Turing for homosexuality, then a criminal offense, and sentenced him to chemical castration as an alternative to imprisonment. He died in 1954 at the age of 41, with an apple beside his bed that had been partially eaten. The cause of death recorded as cyanide poisoning. The British government issued a formal royal pardon in 2013. 59 years after his death, everything you just heard, the Spartan stick, Caesar's alphabet shift, Al-Kindi's frequency analysis, the Vigenera cipher, Mary's execution, the Zimmermann telegram, the Enigma machine, Alan Turing, all of it was building toward one unsolved problem that nobody could crack for thousands of years. How do 2 people share a secret key when they have never met, when every channel between them is being watched, and when handing over the key itself is just as dangerous as handing over the message? In 1976, 2 mathematicians in California named Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman solved it, and their solution made the modern internet possible. Shortly after, 3 MIT mathematicians named Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman built on that foundation and created something the world had never seen: a lock that anyone could close, but only one person could open. Everything from here is mathematics, but you do not need to fear that word tonight. Okay, that was the history. Now let us actually learn the thing. Let us strip away every complicated word and get down to what encryption actually is at its most basic level. Imagine you write something private in a diary and lock it. The words are still there, unchanged, sitting on the page, but they are now inaccessible to anyone without the key. The information has not disappeared. It has simply been made unreachable. That is encryption, not magic, not complexity for its own sake, just a transformation that makes readable information unreadable to everyone except the right person. 4 words. That is the entire vocabulary of cryptography. Plaintext. That is the original, readable message, the email before it is scrambled, the credit card number before it is transmitted. Plaintext is information in its natural, human-readable form. Ciphertext. That is what plaintext becomes after encryption scrambled, unreadable noise that looks like nonsense to anyone without the key. It is supposed to. Key. A specific piece of information, a number, a password, a mathematical value that controls exactly how plaintext transforms to ciphertext and back again. Without the key, ciphertext is just noise. Algorithm. The rule. The specific mathematical procedure that uses the key to perform the transformation. Think of the algorithm as the lock mechanism itself, and the key as the specific key that operates it. The Caesar cipher uses all 4 simultaneously. Your plaintext is meet at dawn. Your algorithm is the shift rule. Your key is the number 3. Your ciphertext becomes PHWDDZQ. 4 concepts. One simple example. Every encryption system ever built from ancient Rome to modern banking software is a variation on exactly this structure. Encryption serves 2 goals. Confidentiality. Nobody unauthorized can read the message. Integrity. Nobody can tamper with it undetected. Every system we are about to discuss serves both. Now, the first type of encryption, the one that ruled the world until the 1970s, is called symmetric encryption, and the best way to understand it is to imagine a jewelry box. Imagine a jewelry box with 1 lock and exactly 1 key in the world. You have it. Nobody else does. Anything inside that box is completely safe, sealed away, protected by the simple fact that the key exists only in your possession. Now imagine you want to send something valuable to a friend in another city. Place it in the box, snap the lock shut, and mail it. Your friend receives it but cannot open it because your friend does not have the key, so you mail the key separately. But now anyone who intercepts either package can access everything. And sending the key and the box together solves nothing at all. This is symmetric encryption. And that maddening problem is why it stumped the entire world for thousands of years. Symmetric encryption runs on one principle: a single secret key both locks and unlocks the data. The same key that encrypts plaintext into ciphertext is the same key that decrypts ciphertext back into plaintext. Both sender and receiver must possess an identical copy before any secure communication can begin. 1 key, 2 people, both must have it. The elegance here is genuine. Symmetric encryption is extraordinarily fast. The mathematical operations are simple enough that your device encrypts enormous amounts of data in fractions of a second. The modern version, called AES or Advanced Encryption Standard, is so efficient it encrypts your entire smartphone storage continuously, invisibly, in real time. Governments use it. Militaries use it. Banks use it. When your phone locks behind a pin, AES is what is actually protecting everything on it. But here is the flaw that no amount of elegance can fix. To both have the key, one person must give it to the other. And every way of doing that, a road, a wire, a radio signal, an internet connection, is a channel someone might be watching. If that someone intercepts the key, every message that follows is readable. The security of the entire system collapses at exactly the moment the key changes hands. This is the key exchange problem. For thousands of years, there was no solution. Governments hand-delivered codebooks in locked briefcases. Militaries built enormous key distribution networks. When the internet arrived, demanding secure communication with millions of strangers across the world, and physically delivering a key to each of them became impossible. For thousands of years, this was an unsolvable problem. And then, in 1976, 2 men in California solved it using mathematics so elegant it almost feels like cheating. Cryptographers have a way of explaining this problem that is so clean and so precise that it has become the standard notation used in textbooks, research papers, and university lectures around the world. There are three people. Alice wants to send Bob a secret message. Eve is listening to every single transmission between them. Every word, every signal, every packet of data that travels from Alice to Bob passes through Eve's ears first. Alice and Bob have never met in person. They share no prior secret. They have no secure channel. They have only the one public channel that Eve is already monitoring. How do Alice and Bob agree on a secret key without Eve learning it? Think through every intuitive solution, because every one of them fails. Alice could simply send Bob the key directly. Eve intercepts it. Now Eve has the key and can read every message that follows. Alice could encrypt the key before sending it, but that requires a separate key to encrypt the first key, which has the same problem. Alice and Bob could agree on a key in advance at some prior meeting, but that requires a prior meeting, which is exactly what the modern internet makes impossible. You cannot schedule a physical meeting with every website you want to visit securely. Every door closes. Every solution assumes some prior secret that does not exist. In the 1970s, as the earliest networks began connecting computers across distances, this stopped being a theoretical puzzle and became an urgent practical crisis. The CIA hand-delivered diplomatic codebooks to embassies in locked briefcases carried by trusted couriers, a system that worked for dozens of locations, but was completely unscalable for a global network of millions. The key exchange problem is simply this: establishing a shared secret over a channel that an enemy is actively monitoring with no prior communication whatsoever. For the entire history of cryptography, it was considered mathematically impossible. Here is what makes the solution so beautiful. Diffie and Hellman did not find a way to hide the key. They found a way to create a shared secret in plain sight, while someone is actively listening to every word. Whitfield Diffie did not look like someone about to solve the oldest unsolved problem in cryptography. He had long hair, an intense distrust of government institutions, and a near-obsessive conviction that ordinary people deserved the right to private communication in the emerging digital world. In the mid-1970s, he was wandering California, reading everything about cryptography, thinking about the key exchange problem, with the kind of focused attention most people reserve for things actively threatening them. Because to Diffie, it was. He believed, correctly, that governments were positioned to monitor all digital communication as networks expanded, and that without a mathematical solution, ordinary citizens would have no privacy in the coming digital age. This was not paranoia. This was foresight. The breakthrough came from a simple observation about mathematics. Some operations are easy in one direction and practically impossible to reverse. Multiplying two large prime numbers takes a computer fractions of a second. Taking the resulting product and figuring out which two primes produced it can take longer than the current age of the universe. This asymmetry, this mathematical one-way street, was the key to everything. Here is the paint mixing analogy, because it is the clearest explanation this idea has ever received. Alice and Bob want to agree on a secret color. They start with a shared public color, yellow. Everyone knows it. Eve knows it. That is fine. Alice secretly chooses red and mixes it with yellow, producing orange. Bob secretly chooses blue and mixes it with yellow, producing green. They exchange their mixtures publicly. Eve sees both. Now Alice takes Bob's green and adds her secret red. Bob takes Alice's orange and adds his secret blue. Both arrive at the identical final color, a specific shade containing red, blue, and yellow. Eve, who only ever saw yellow, orange, and green, cannot unmix those colors to find the secret components. The shared secret exists. Eve cannot reach it. The mathematics Diffie and Hellman used, called the discrete logarithm problem, works on exactly this principle, replacing paint with enormous numbers. Computing forward is trivial. Reversing it is computationally catastrophic. Their 1976 paper, New Directions in Cryptography, changed everything. Every time you connect to a website via HTTPS through a browser, and that server silently performed this handshake in milliseconds, agreeing on a session key before a single byte of your data moves. You have never noticed it. It has happened thousands of times in your life. Diffie and Hellman showed the world that a shared secret could emerge from public exchange, but they did not build the full lock. That came from three mathematicians at MIT, and they named it after themselves. In 1977, three mathematicians at MIT sat down to build on what Diffie and Hellman had started. Their names were Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Leonard Edelman. They worked through the night on the problem repeatedly, testing ideas and discarding them, until Rivest, unable to sleep after a Passover dinner, lay on his couch and worked out the complete solution in his head. By morning, he had written it into a paper. They named the system after their three initials: RSA. Here is the padlock analogy, because it makes this immediately clear. Imagine you manufacture a padlock, an open, unlocked padlock, and you make thousands of copies and distribute them freely across your entire city. You leave them on doorsteps and mailboxes at street corners. Anyone can pick one up. Anyone who wants to send you a private message takes a box, places their message inside, snaps your padlock shut, and mails it to you. The box is now locked. Only you possess the private key that opens your specific padlock design. Not even the person who locked it can get back inside. They snapped it shut and walked away. This is asymmetric encryption. Two mathematically linked keys, a public key that encrypts, and a private key that decrypts. They are generated together as a matched pair, but knowing one does not allow you to calculate the other in any practical time frame. The mathematical foundation is the prime factorization problem. Take two enormous prime numbers, each hundreds of digits long, and multiply them together. The result is your public key. To break RSA, an attacker must take that product and figure out which two primes created it. For the key sizes used today, that calculation would take classical computers billions of years. When you see the padlock icon in your browser, this is what is happening. Your browser receives the website's public key, uses it to encrypt a session key, and sends that encrypted session key to the server. Only the server's private key can decrypt it. This entire exchange completes in under 100 milliseconds, invisibly. Every single time you visit a secure website, RSA did not just solve a mathematical puzzle. It created the infrastructure of digital trust that every online transaction in the modern world depends on. Every bank transfer, every private message, every government communication traveling across the internet today. Diffie and Hellman found the concept. Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman built the lock. Now that you understand how modern encryption works, it is worth asking the most obvious question anyone could ask. What if you simply tried every possible key until one worked? This is called a brute force attack. And the reason it sounds simple is because it is simple. The reason it does not work against modern encryption is mathematics. Imagine a bike lock with 4 digits. Each digit runs from 0 to 9, giving you 10,000 possible combinations. If you sat down and tried one combination every second, you would crack it within 3 hours. Inconvenient, but entirely possible. Imagine that instead of 4 digits, your lock has 78. And instead of 10 possible values per digit, each position has 2, a 0, or a 1. That is AES 256, the encryption standard protecting your phone, your bank, and most government communications on Earth. The number of possible keys is 2 raised to the power of 256. Written out, that number has 78 digits. The observable universe contains roughly 10 to the power of 80 atoms. The number of possible AES 256 keys is larger. Every computer ever built, running simultaneously, trying 1 trillion keys per second, would not crack a single AES 256 key before the universe ended. This is what cryptographers mean when they say a cipher is secure, not unbreakable in principle, but computationally impractical in reality. The one exception is something called the one-time pad, a system using a truly random key as long as the message itself used only once. That is mathematically proven unbreakable. Everything else is just a matter of making the mathematics hard enough that breaking it costs more time than the secret is worth. Security is not magic. It is patience made mathematically unreachable. Here is something that will change how you think about every password you have ever created. The website you logged into this morning, your email, your bank, your social media account does not know your password. It has never stored your password. It could not tell you your password if you asked. Not because of a policy, but because it genuinely does not have it. What it stored, the moment you created your account, was something called a hash. And understanding what a hash is will make the entire architecture of internet security click into place. Imagine a meat grinder. You put a steak in, ground beef comes out. The transformation is fast, completely deterministic. The same steak always produces the same ground beef, and utterly irreversible. You cannot put ground beef back into the grinder and recover the original steak. The information about the steak's original structure is gone. This is exactly how a hash function works. A hash function takes any input, a password, a document, an entire video file, and produces a fixed-length output called a hash or digest. For SHA-256, the standard used across most of the internet today, that output is always exactly 64 characters long, regardless of whether the input was 2 letters or 2 million. The word password produces one specific 64-character string. The word password, just a capital P, produces a completely different 64-character string. Change one character anywhere in the input, and the entire output changes unpredictably. This is called the avalanche effect. When you log in, your device hashes whatever you typed and sends that hash to the server. The server compares it to the stored hash. If they match, you are in. Your actual password never travels anywhere. When hackers steal a database, they steal hashes. They cannot reverse them. They can only hash millions of common passwords and check for matches, which is exactly why password 123 is dangerous and a random 20-character string is not. Encryption solves one problem, keeping a message private. But privacy alone is not enough. There is a second problem that is just as important, and it is one you encounter every single day without realizing it. How do you know that a message actually came from who it claims to be from? Anyone can write an email and put any name in the sender field. Anyone can build a website and claim to be your bank. Anyone can intercept a software update traveling across the internet and replace it with something malicious. Encryption hides content. It does nothing to verify identity. For that, you need something different. You need a digital signature. Think about the wax seals that medieval kings pressed onto their letters. The king would write a letter, fold it, and press his unique signet ring into hot wax, producing an impression that only his specific ring could create. Anyone receiving that letter could examine the seal, recognize the king's mark, and know two things simultaneously. This letter came from the king, and it has not been opened since he sealed it. A broken or mismatched seal meant tampering. An intact seal meant authenticity. A digital signature works on exactly this principle, using the same asymmetric key pairs from RSA that you already understand. When you want to sign a message, your device first runs it through a hash function, producing a unique digest of that specific message. It then encrypts that digest using your private key. The result is your digital signature, a unique mathematical mark that is attached to the message before sending. Anyone who receives it takes your public key, decrypts the signature, and recovers the original digest. They then hash the message themselves and compare the two digests. If they match perfectly, two things are confirmed. The message came from you, because only your private key could have produced that signature, and the message is unaltered, because even one changed character would produce a completely different hash. Every application on your phone is digitally signed by its developer. Every software update you receive is signed by the company that built it. Every certificate securing every HTTPS website carries a digital signature from a trusted authority. Identity on the internet is not assumed. It is mathematically proven every single time. Take a moment and think about what you now understand. You know what encryption is: a transformation of readable information into unreadable noise using a key and an algorithm. You know that symmetric encryption uses one shared key that is blindingly fast but requires a prior exchange. You know that Diffie and Hellman solved the exchange problem by creating a shared secret in public view. You know that RSA built an asymmetric lock, a public key anyone can use to seal a message, and a private key only you can use to open it. You know that hash functions create irreversible fingerprints that protect your passwords without ever storing them. And you know that digital signatures use all of this together to prove identity mathematically without anyone's word being required. These four tools, symmetric encryption, asymmetric encryption, hash functions, and digital signatures, do not operate separately in the real world. They work in layers simultaneously, each one covering the weakness of the others. Every time you connect to a secure website, all four activate within milliseconds. Symmetric encryption handles the key exchange. Symmetric encryption handles the bulk data. Hash functions verify integrity. Digital signatures confirm identity. The entire handshake completes before you have finished reading the URL. This layered system has a name. It is called TLS, Transport Layer Security, and it is the invisible foundation underneath every secure interaction the modern internet produces. You now understand how it works. Not approximately. Actually, let us look at where it lives in the real world, in places you use every single day, and in a few places that will genuinely surprise you. Every time you visit a website and see that small padlock icon in the corner of your browser, something specific is happening underneath it that you now have the tools to understand completely. That padlock means the connection between your device and that website is protected by TLS, the layered system of asymmetric key exchange, symmetric encryption, hash verification, and digital signatures that you just spent the last hour understanding. Every byte of data traveling between you and that server is encrypted. Every packet is verified. Nobody's sitting between you and the website on your Wi-Fi network, at your internet provider, anywhere along the route can read the contents of that connection. But here is something worth knowing. That padlock does not mean the website is safe. It does not mean the website is legitimate. It does not mean the people running it are trustworthy. It means only one thing. The connection is encrypted. A perfectly functional phishing site designed to steal your credentials can display that padlock honestly because the connection genuinely is encrypted. The lock secures the road. It says nothing about the destination. The system of trust that verifies website identities sits one layer above TLS, a network of organizations called certificate authorities who digitally sign website certificates, vouching for their legitimacy. In 2014, a single bug in this infrastructure called Heartbleed exposed the private keys of hundreds of thousands of servers simultaneously. The road was fine. The lock mechanism itself had a crack. HTTPS protects data traveling between you and a server, but that server can still read everything you send it. The company running it sees your messages, stores them, and in many countries is legally required to hand them to governments upon request. For most internet activity, that is an acceptable trade-off. For private communication, it is not. End-to-end encryption solves this by moving the keys entirely out of the company's hands. In a properly implemented end-to-end encrypted system, the encryption and decryption happen only on the devices of the sender and receiver. The message travels through the company's servers in ciphertext that the company itself cannot read. Not because of a policy, because they do not have the key. The Signal protocol, developed by Open Whisper Systems and now used by both Signal and WhatsApp, is the gold standard implementation of this idea. When you send a Signal message, it is encrypted on your device before it leaves, travels through Signal's servers as unreadable noise, and decrypts only when it arrives on your recipient's device. Signal sees nothing. In 2016, the FBI demanded Apple unlock a dead terrorist's iPhone. Apple refused, arguing they had built a system specifically designed so that even they could not access it. The case went to court and was eventually dropped when the FBI found an alternative method. But there is a limit. End-to-end encryption hides what you say. It does not hide that you said it, when or to whom. That shadow, your metadata, remains visible always. In 2008, An anonymous person or group operating under the name Satoshi Nakamoto published a 9-page paper describing a system for digital currency that required no bank, no government, and no central authority of any kind. The entire trust mechanism of this system was not institutional, it was mathematical, and every piece of mathematics underneath it is something you now understand. Your cryptocurrency wallet is not a wallet in any physical sense. It is a public and private key pair. Your wallet address, the string of characters you give people to send you funds, is derived directly from your public key. When you send cryptocurrency, you sign the transaction with your private key, proving ownership without revealing the key itself. The network verifies your signature using your public key. No bank approves the transaction. Mathematics approves it. The blockchain itself is a chain of hash functions. Each block of transactions contains the hash of the block before it. Change any historical transaction, alter a single number in any block, and its hash changes, breaking the chain at that point and making the tampering immediately visible to every participant in the network simultaneously. Bitcoin's mining process runs entirely on SHA-256, the same hash function protecting most internet passwords today. Think about that for a second. The technology that people treat as mysterious and revolutionary is built entirely from the same 4 cryptographic tools: hash functions, digital signatures, public key cryptography, and symmetric encryption that have been quietly running the internet for decades. Here is one that will genuinely expand where you think cryptography lies. The DNA inside every cell of your body is a code. Not metaphorically, literally. 4 chemical bases, abbreviated as A, T, C, and G, arranged in sequences of 3 billion pairs, encoding every instruction your body has ever needed to build and maintain itself. The alphabet has 4 characters instead of 26. The messages are written in combinations of 3 letters instead of variable length words. But the fundamental structure, an alphabet, a sequence, and encoded meaning is identical to every cipher you have learned about tonight. Researchers at Harvard's Church Laboratory took this parallel seriously. In 2012, they encoded an entire book, George Church's own memoir, including images and a JavaScript program, into synthetic DNA. The storage density of DNA is so extreme that theoretically 1 cubic millimeter could hold 1 exabyte of data. That is 1 billion gigabytes in a space smaller than a grain of sand. The encryption angle goes further. Researchers have encoded encrypted data into DNA strands, with the decryption key stored in a separate DNA sequence entirely. The message is biological. The lock is mathematical. The 2 systems have merged completely. And then there is the Voynich manuscript, a 240-page 15th century book written in an alphabet no one has ever identified, filled with illustrations of unrecognizable plants and astronomical diagrams that the FBI, the NSA, and every codebreaker who has attempted it have failed to crack for over 600 years. Everything you have learned tonight involves scrambling a message so it cannot be read. But there is a parallel tradition in secret communication that takes a completely different approach. Instead of making the message unreadable, you make it invisible. You hide it inside something so ordinary that nobody thinks to look. This is steganography, and it is older than cryptography itself. The ancient Greeks once shaved a slave's head completely, tattooed a secret message onto the scalp, waited for the hair to grow back, and sent the slave to the recipient, who shaved the head again and read the message. The message was never encrypted. It was simply hidden inside a human being walking down a road. During the American Revolution, George Washington's spy network, known as the Culper Ring, used a chemical called sympathetic stain as invisible ink. Messages written with it were completely invisible on paper until a specific reagent was brushed across the surface, at which point the words appeared fully formed. Modern digital steganography hides entire files inside ordinary image files by making microscopic changes to individual pixel values, changes invisible to the human eye, but recoverable by the right software. A photograph of a cat on the internet might contain an encrypted document inside it. Hide the message, then encrypt it, then hide the encryption. The layers go as deep as you need them to. Everything you have learned tonight, the mathematics, the protocols, the layered systems of trust, was nearly made illegal. In the early 1990s, the United States government classified strong encryption as a munition, not metaphorically, legally, in the same regulatory category as tanks, missiles, and military weapons systems. Exporting strong encryption software outside American borders without government approval was a federal crime, carrying the same penalties as arms trafficking. The reasoning was straightforward. Intelligence agencies had spent decades building the ability to monitor communications. Strong encryption, freely available to ordinary citizens, would make that monitoring impossible. The NSA proposed a solution called the Clipper chip, a hardware component that would be built into all encryption devices, implementing strong encryption for users while maintaining a secret government backdoor allowing lawful interception. The technology industry rejected it completely. A programmer named Phil Zimmermann responded by releasing a free encryption program called PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, over the internet in 1991. The government launched a criminal investigation against him that lasted 3 years before being dropped. Programmers fought back in the most literal way imaginable by printing encryption source code on t-shirts and wearing them in public, arguing that source code is speech and that the First Amendment protected their right to wear mathematics on their chest. In 2013, Edward Snowden revealed that the NSA had secretly inserted a backdoor into an official NIST encryption standard, compromising the security of systems that had trusted it for years. Crypto wars never ended. They simply changed address. Every cipher you have learned about tonight was built from mathematics. Substitution, transposition, modular exponentiation, prime factorization, all of it reducible to numbers and operations on numbers. During the Second World War, the United States Marine Corps deployed a cipher that had no mathematics in it whatsoever. It was built entirely from something the enemy had no framework to attack: a language. The Navajo language had no written form. It had never been formally documented. It was spoken by fewer than 30 non-Navajo people on Earth, none of whom were Japanese. Its grammatical structure tonal, polysynthetic, with verb forms that changed meaning based on factors that had no equivalent in any European or Asian language, made it essentially impenetrable to anyone who had not grown up inside it. Beginning in 1942, the Marine Corps recruited over 400 Navajo speakers to serve as code talkers, transmitting battlefield communications in a specialized code built on top of the Navajo language itself. Japanese signals intelligence, which had broken every other American code they encountered, never cracked it. Not once. It remains the only unbroken spoken military code in the history of warfare. The Congressional Gold Medal was awarded to the Navajo Code Talkers in 2001, nearly 60 years after they helped turn the Pacific War. The most unbreakable cipher anyone ever built was not mathematics. It was a community that the enemy had simply never thought to learn. Everything you now understand about modern encryption rests on one foundational assumption: that certain mathematical problems are so computationally difficult that no machine built from classical physics could solve them within any useful time frame. Factoring large primes, computing discrete logarithms. These are the locks. The assumption that they cannot be picked is what makes the entire system work. Quantum computers do not respect that assumption. A classical computer processes information as bits, each one a 0 or a 1, a switch that is either off or on. A quantum computer processes information as qubits, which exploit a property of quantum mechanics called superposition, the ability to exist as 0 and 1 simultaneously until measured. This allows a quantum computer to evaluate enormous numbers of possibilities in parallel rather than sequentially, in ways that have no equivalent in classical computing. In 1994, a mathematician named Peter Shor developed an algorithm running on a theoretical quantum computer that could factor large prime numbers exponentially faster than any classical machine. Shor's algorithm does not just make RSA harder to break, it makes RSA breakable. A sufficiently powerful quantum computer running Shor's algorithm could crack RSA 2048 in hours rather than billions of years. That computer does not fully exist yet, but it is being built. And intelligence agencies around the world are already responding to a strategy called Harvest, now decrypt later, collecting and storing encrypted internet traffic today, with the intention of decrypting it once quantum computing matures sufficiently. Your messages sent today could be read tomorrow, not by current machines, by machines that do not exist yet but are coming. NIST, the American Standards Body, finalized its first post-quantum encryption standards in August 2024. The transition has already begun. The cryptographers were not caught off guard. They never are. While quantum computers were still largely theoretical, mathematicians were already designing encryption systems built on mathematical problems that even quantum computers cannot solve efficiently. The field is called post-quantum cryptography, and its foundations look nothing like the prime factorization problems that RSA depends on. The leading approach is called lattice-based cryptography. Imagine a grid of points extending across thousands of dimensions, simultaneously, far beyond anything the human mind can visualize, existing purely as mathematics. Finding a specific short path through that lattice, given only a scrambled version of the grid, is a problem that neither classical nor quantum computers can solve in any practical time frame with current mathematical knowledge. The geometry is simply too complex, the dimensions too many, the search space too vast. NIST finalized 3 post-quantum cryptographic standards in August 2024, published as FIPS 23, 24, and 25. Primary algorithms, Crystal's Kyber for key exchange and Crystal's dilithium for digital signatures, are already being integrated into real systems. Google has implemented post-quantum cryptography in Chrome. Apple has introduced it into iMessage. The transition is not theoretical. It is happening now, invisibly, in the same way TLS replaced its predecessors quietly, underneath everything, while the surface remained unchanged. The arms race has never stopped. Every generation of cryptographers has inherited a broken lock from the previous generation and built a stronger one. Lattice mathematics is simply the newest lock, and somewhere, right now, someone is already looking for the crack. Step back for a moment from all the mathematics, all the history, all the machines and algorithms and key exchanges, and ask the question that sits underneath all of it. What is cryptography actually for? Not technically. Philosophically, every human civilization that has ever existed has faced the same problem. How do you extend trust beyond the people you can personally see and touch? How do you communicate with someone across a distance, across a border, across a silence, without that communication being intercepted, corrupted, or forged by someone who wishes you harm? The answer that every civilization reached for, in every era, using whatever tools their mathematics allowed, was cryptography. A Spartan general wrapping leather around a stick, Al-Kindi counting letters in the House of Wisdom, Mary Queen of Scots pressing coded symbols into letters she believed were secret, Anne Turing running electromechanical drums through the cold rooms of Bletchley Park, Whitfield Diffie wandering California with a question that had no answer, until it did. The Navajo code talkers transmitting in a language the enemy had never thought to learn. All of them were solving the same problem. All of them were asking the same question. How do I reach you across the dangerous space between us, without the danger getting there first? The mathematics has changed completely. The human need underneath it has not moved at all. Every encrypted message you send is a small act of faith that mathematics is reliable, that trust can be constructed from numbers, and that somewhere in the structure of the universe, order is more fundamental than chaos.